I stood in the hallway of my grandson's 6th birthday party, and my daughter-in-law looked me straight in the eye and said, "Stop interfering in our lives. We don't need your help anymore." I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply walked outside, pulled out my phone, and called my lawyer. 4 words: freeze the trust fund. 2 weeks later, when she tried to withdraw $250,000 for a new house, the bank told her the account was locked. The look on her face when she realized who controlled it, I'll remember that for the rest of my life. My name is Sylvia Morrison. I'm 65 years old. And this is the story of how protecting the people you love sometimes means protecting them from their own parents. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from. Let me start 4 years ago when everything was different, when my husband Martin was still alive. We were sitting in the hospice room, one of those sterile places that tries too hard to feel homey with floral curtains and soft lighting that can't quite hide what's really happening. Martin had been fighting pancreatic cancer for 11 months. We both knew he was losing. His hand felt so light in mine, like he was already halfway gone. "Sylvia," he whispered, his voice barely there. "Promise me something." "Anything." I meant it. "Don't let them waste it. The money. Our life's work." He struggled to breathe. "Money should build futures, not buy compliance. Remember that." I didn't understand then what he meant, but I would. Martin died on a Tuesday morning in March with spring rain tapping against the window. We'd been married 43 years. He was a software engineer back when that meant punch cards and mainframes. I'd spent 30 years climbing the corporate ladder until I became CFO of a mid-sized tech company. We worked hard. We invested smart. And by the time I retired at 60, we'd built real wealth. Not buy a yacht money, but several million in investments, retirement accounts, 2 properties. Enough that I'd never have to worry. Enough that my children and grandchildren could have opportunities. Martin left everything to me. Complete trust that I'd handle it wisely. I wish he'd been more specific about what wisely meant. The funeral was crowded. Martin had been well loved. My son Derek stood beside me at the graveside, his arm around my shoulders. He was 38, then a civil engineer with a good job and a growing family. His wife Amber stood on his other side, appropriately somber in a black dress that probably cost more than I spent on clothes in a year. "Mom, you're not alone," Derek whispered as they lowered the casket. "We're here for you." I believed him. My daughter Rachel flew in from Boston with her husband and 9-year-old son Owen. Rachel's a pediatric surgeon, brilliant, driven, and the person who understands me best in this world. She stayed for 2 weeks after the funeral, helping me sort through Martin's things, sitting with me during the long, silent evenings. "You know Derek will expect help," Rachel said one night over wine. We were packing Martin's clothes for donation. "Amber's been hinting about it already." "What kind of help?" "The financial kind." Rachel held up one of Martin's old sweaters, smiled sadly, and folded it. "She asked me at the funeral if you'd be distributing assets soon." My stomach tightened. "At the funeral?" "In the church bathroom, actually. Very tasteful timing." Rachel's voice had an edge. "I told her that was between you and Derek." I should have paid more attention to that moment. But grief makes you stupid. It makes you want to believe the best in people because you can't handle believing the worst. 3 months after Martin died, I did something I thought was smart. I called Thomas Brennan, the financial advisor who'd worked with us for 20 years. His office downtown smelled like leather and old books. Thomas was 54, gray-haired, with the kind of calm competence that made you trust him with your life savings. He'd guided us through market crashes, retirement planning, and now widowhood. "I want to set up trust funds," I told him, "for my grandchildren." Thomas nodded, already pulling out papers. "Smart move. How many grandchildren?" 3. Lucas is 2, Sophie's just born, and Owen's 5. I'd thought this through. 250,000 for each of them. Thomas's pen paused. "That's $750,000, Sylvia. You're certain?" "No. Martin and I talked about it before he got sick. We wanted to give them opportunities." I leaned forward. "But I don't want to just hand them money. I want it protected until they're old enough to use it wisely." "What age were you thinking?" 25. Old enough to have finished college to know themselves a little. Young enough that it can still change their trajectory." Thomas smiled. "I like it. And who do you want as trustee?" "Me." The answer was immediate. "I want full discretionary control. They can access it early for education or medical emergencies, but only with my approval. Nobody else touches it. That's when Thomas gave me a look I didn't fully understand at the time. Sylvia, you're setting up ironclad trusts with yourself as sole trustee. That means your children, Derek and Rachel, will have zero access, zero control. Are you prepared for how they might feel about that? Rachel won't care, and Derek, I paused. Derek will understand it's for his children's benefit. Thomas wrote something in his notes. I saw it later after everything fell apart. Client may be underestimating family dynamics. Recommend additional safeguards. He was right. I was underestimating everything. For the first few years, everything seemed fine. Better than fine, actually. Derek and Amber had been married 3 years when Martin died. Their wedding had been my first real introduction to Amber's spending habits, though I didn't see it that way then. Mom, we've been talking, Derek said over dinner 6 months before the wedding. Amber sat beside him, her hand on his knee, smiling that bright, confident smile that made you want to like her. We'd really love your help with the wedding. Of course. What do you need? Amber jumped in her voice, warm and grateful. Well, my parents can't contribute much. Dad's retired and Mom's on a fixed income. We were hoping maybe you could help with the venue. Nothing crazy, just something nice. We found this beautiful place by the lake. She showed me pictures on her phone. It was gorgeous, elegant, expensive. How much are we talking? I asked. The venue package is $30,000, but that includes everything: ceremony, reception, catering, decorations. Derek squeezed her hand. We know it's a lot, Mom. If you can't, I'll do it, I said, because I could afford it, because I wanted Derek to be happy, because Amber's eyes lit up with such genuine joy that I felt good about making someone's dream come true. The wedding ended up costing them $55,000. I found out later, much later, that after I committed to the $30,000, Amber upgraded everything. Better flowers, premium bar, designer dress, destination bachelorette party. She didn't ask me to cover the extra costs. She just assumed Derek would figure it out, which meant he drained his savings and took on credit card debt. But the wedding itself was beautiful. Amber looked stunning. Derek couldn't stop smiling. And when Amber hugged me during the reception, tears in her eyes saying, "Thank you for making this perfect, Mom. I've never felt so loved. I thought I'd made the right choice." I was building a relationship with my son's wife. That's what mothers do. Lucas was born 18 months later. I drove to the hospital the moment Derek called, my heart pounding with the kind of joy that makes you forget every bad thing that's ever happened. He was perfect. 7 pounds dark hair, Martin's nose. When the nurse placed him in my arms, I cried harder than I had at the funeral. You want to hold your grandson, I whispered to the ceiling to Martin wherever he was. Derek and Amber moved into a small 2-bedroom house in a decent neighborhood. Both working full-time, they were struggling with the reality of parenthood. Daycare costs shocked them. $2,000 a month, Derek told me over the phone. He sounded exhausted. Mom, I don't know how we're going to manage this. Amber's entire paycheck basically goes to daycare. We're barely breaking even. I didn't hesitate. I'll cover it. Mom, no. That's too much. Derek, I want to do this. You're my son. Lucas is my grandson. Let me help. So I paid for daycare. Every month for 2 years. $48,000. I wrote the checks directly to the facility and never mentioned it again. It wasn't a loan. It wasn't leverage. It was just love. At least that's what I told myself. Looking back now, I wonder if I was trying to fill the hole Martin left. If being needed made me feel less alone in that big empty house, Sophie was born when Lucas was 4. Another perfect grandchild. Another reason to feel like life still held joy. But something shifted after Sophie's birth. Amber decided to quit her job to stay home with the kids. It just makes sense, she explained over coffee at their kitchen table. Lucas was in preschool, Sophie napping upstairs. Daycare for 2 kids would cost nearly $4,000 a month, and I want to be present for these years. You understand, right, Sylvia? She called me Sylvia, not Mom. I noticed that. It had changed gradually sometime after the wedding. Of course I understand, I said. Being home with your children is valuable. The thing is, Amber glanced toward the stairs, lowering her voice, even though Derek was at work. Money's going to be tighter. Derek's doing well, but with just one income. She trailed off meaningfully. Do you need help? The relief on her face looked genuine. I hate to ask, but maybe just for a few months, until we adjust to the new budget. I helped for 2 years. Groceries when their account ran low, medical co-pays when Sophie had ear infections, a new transmission for their car when it died, Christmas presents so the kids wouldn't notice Mommy and Daddy were struggling, a family vacation to Florida because the kids need memories, not just stress. I kept the receipts, not because I planned to ask for repayment, but because my accountant insisted on documentation for tax purposes. When Thomas reviewed my finances each year, he'd frown at the family assistance category. Sylvia, you gave Derek and Amber $43,000 last year. I helped them. There's a difference. Is there? He'd peer at me over his reading glasses. Because from where I sit, you're subsidizing their entire lifestyle while their children's trust funds sit untouched. The trust funds are for later. This is for now. And what happens when now never ends? I didn't have an answer for that. The early years weren't all bad. There were Sunday dinners at my house with both kids running around the backyard, Lucas learning to ride a bike while I cheered from the porch, Sophie's first steps taken while reaching for me, birthday parties and holidays and normal family chaos. Amber seemed genuinely grateful. She'd hug me after I helped with bills, her eyes shiny with tears. I don't know what we'd do without you, Sylvia. You're a lifesaver. Derek would squeeze my shoulder, kiss my cheek. You're the best mom. I felt needed, useful, like I had a purpose beyond sitting alone in a house full of memories. But there were small things I told myself didn't matter, like how Amber posted constantly on social media about their blessed life and amazing family. But there were never photos of me with the grandkids. Her parents appeared regularly. My face was absent, or how visits to their house required more and more advance notice. We need to maintain our family routine, Amber would say when I suggested dropping by. Let's plan for next weekend instead. Or how Derek's calls became shorter, less frequent. And when I asked about his life, his answers sounded rehearsed, like he was reporting to a manager instead of talking to his mother. Rachel noticed. She's isolating him, my daughter said during one of her visits from Boston. Classic controlling behavior, cutting off his support system so he's dependent on her. That's a little dramatic, honey. Is it? When's the last time Derek came to see you without Amber? When's the last time he made a decision she didn't approve first? I couldn't remember. It's probably just young marriage stuff, I said. They're finding their rhythm as a couple. Rachel gave me a look that said she thought I was being naive. She was right. The first real crack appeared on a Tuesday afternoon about 2 years ago. I'd been at a doctor's appointment nearby and decided to stop by Derek and Amber's house with cookies I'd baked. I knew showing up unannounced violated Amber's rules, but it was 2 p.m. on a weekday. The kids would be excited to see me. I knocked on the door holding my Tupperware of chocolate chip cookies. Through the window I could see Amber in the living room on the phone. She looked up, saw me, and her expression went from neutral to annoyed in half a second. She didn't come to the door. I knocked again. I could literally see her standing there. Finally, she walked over and opened the door about 6 inches. Sylvia, we weren't expecting you. I know I'm sorry to drop in. I was in the neighborhood and thought the kids might like some fresh cookies. They're napping. It was 2 p.m. Sophie maybe, but Lucas was 5 and hadn't napped in years. Oh, well, I can just leave these. Actually, we're dealing with something right now. Amber's voice was tight. This really isn't a good time. Over her shoulder, I could see papers spread across the dining table. Official-looking documents. One had a logo I recognized, a property appraisal company. Is everything okay? I asked. If you need help with anything, we're fine. We have everything under control. She took the Tupperware from my hands. Thanks for these. I'll call you later this week to schedule a proper visit. The door closed in my face. I stood there for a moment feeling foolish and hurt. Through the window, I watched Amber return to the dining table, pick up her phone, and continue her conversation like I'd never been there. When I got to my car, my hands were shaking so badly I had to sit for 5 minutes before I could drive. That night, Derek called. Mom, Amber said you stopped by today. I did. I'm sorry if that was inconvenient. No, it's just, we've talked about this. We need advance notice for visits. We're trying to maintain boundaries. Boundaries. The word tasted bitter. Derek, I'm your mother. I brought cookies for my grandchildren. That requires 3 days' notice. Silence on the line. Then Amber thinks, she feels like you're always just showing up, inserting yourself into our lives, like we can't do anything without you hovering. Hovering. My voice rose. I've been helping you, Derek. For 7 years I've been helping or controlling. The question was soft, but it cut deep. Because sometimes it feels like the help comes with strings attached, like we owe you something. I couldn't breathe. I have never not once asked you to repay a single dollar. Not money, no, but access, time, gratitude. He sighed. I don't know, Mom. I'm just trying to keep peace in my marriage. By shutting me out. By setting healthy boundaries. I should go. I'll talk to you later. He hung up. I sat in my kitchen in the house that felt too big and too quiet and realized I was losing my son. Not to death or distance, but to a woman who'd convinced him that his mother's love was actually manipulation. Rachel flew out 2 weeks later. I hadn't called her crying or complaining, but sisters know. She showed up at my door with wine and takeout and the kind of no-nonsense energy that made me feel less alone. Derek's being an idiot, she announced, pouring generous glasses of red wine. But he's a manipulated idiot, which is slightly more forgivable. He thinks I'm controlling them with money. Because Amber told him that. You know what, she is right. Rachel leaned forward. She's isolating him. Textbook abusive behavior. Cut off the family control, the narrative, make him dependent on only her perspective. That seems extreme. Does it? Think about it, Mom. When's the last time Derek talked to Uncle James? They used to be close. I couldn't remember. They're both busy. James called me last month, said he hasn't been invited to a single family event in 2 years. Not Lucas's birthday, not Christmas, nothing. When he tried to visit Amber, said they were focusing on immediate family only. She said that word for word, and it's not just James. Derek's college friends, his coworkers, everyone's been gradually cut away. Haven't you noticed he never mentions anyone anymore except Amber? I had noticed. Derek's world had shrunk to his wife and children. No friends, no hobbies, no life outside what Amber approved. What do I do? I asked. Rachel reached across the table and took my hand. You can't save him, Mom. He has to wake up on his own. But you can protect yourself, and you can protect the grandkids' futures. The trust funds. Exactly. Don't touch them. Don't transfer control. Don't even discuss them. Because I guarantee you Amber knows about them and she's planning how to get access. Derek would never. Derek is exhausted and manipulated and desperate to keep his wife happy. He'll do whatever she convinces him is right, even if it means selling out his own children's futures. I wanted to argue, to insist my son was stronger than that. But deep down, I knew Rachel was right. The next few months were a slow erosion. Derek's calls became even less frequent. When we did talk, the conversations felt scripted, like he was checking off a duty. How are you, Mom? That's good. We're fine. Busy with the kids. I should go. My birthday came and went. For the first time in Derek's life, he forgot. No call, no card, nothing. When I mentioned it a week later, trying to sound casual, not hurt, he was mortified. Oh my God, Mom, I'm so sorry. Work's been crazy and Amber's been dealing with Sophie's school registration and it just slipped my mind. Things don't just slip your mind. People you care about don't slip your mind. But I said, it's fine, honey, don't worry about it. Because what else could I say? I tried one more intervention. One last attempt to reach my son before I lost him completely. I invited Derek to dinner, just the two of us. Father-son night, I called it, knowing that might make it harder for Amber to object. He came, but he was distracted, checking his phone every 5 minutes, picking at his food. Derek, are you happy? I finally asked. He looked up startled. What kind of question is that? A straightforward one. Are you happy in your life? Your marriage? Why are you asking me this? His voice had an edge. Did Rachel say something? I'm asking because you're my son and I love you, and I can see that you're exhausted. You look like you're barely holding on. That's just life with 2 kids and a demanding job, Mom. Everyone's tired. It's more than tired. You've withdrawn from everyone who cares about you. You don't see James anymore. You barely call me. When's the last time you did something just for yourself? Derek set down his fork. Amber says you ask questions like this. Undermining questions designed to make me doubt my marriage. My heart sank. She said you never really approved of her. That you tolerate her because you have to, but you prefer if I'd married someone more like Rachel. Someone with a big career and no time for family. That's not true. That's not even close to, isn't it? He stood up, leaving his dinner half-eaten. You've never really accepted her mom. You give us money and help, but it always comes with this undercurrent of judgment, like we're never quite doing things right. Derek, please sit down. Let's talk about this. I should go. Amber's waiting for me. He left without hugging me goodbye, without even looking back. I sat at that table for an hour after he left, staring at his abandoned plate, and realized I'd already lost him. Anything I said now would only push him further away. Amber had spent years building a wall between us brick by brick, and I'd been too busy being generous to notice. Lucas's 6th birthday party arrived on a sunny Saturday in September. The invitation had come via text from Amber. Lucas's party is September 15, 3 to 5 p.m. You can come for cake at 4 p.m. Please arrive on time. 2 hours. I was allotted 2 hours of my grandson's birthday. Rachel was visiting that weekend. When I showed her the text, she cursed. She's rationing your time like you're a stranger. This is insane. What choice do I have if I don't go? I don't see him at all. So Rachel, Owen, and I showed up at exactly 4:00 p.m. I'd bought Lucas the Lego robotics kit he'd been talking about for months. I'd actually listened when he'd shown me the catalog at my house 3 months ago, before visits became so controlled. Amber opened the door wearing a smile that never reached her eyes. Right on time, Sylvia. Good. The house was full of children and adults, but as I looked around, I realized something that made my chest tight. Not a single person from Derek's side of the family was there. No James, no cousins, not even my sister Betty, who lived 40 minutes away and adored Lucas. The party was entirely Amber's family and friends. Derek stood in the corner of the kitchen looking like a ghost in his own home. Lucas saw me and his face lit up. Grandma Sylvia, Aunt Rachel, Owen. He crashed into me with a hug that made everything worth it. When he opened his present, his eyes went huge. Mom, look. It's the robot kit, the one I wanted. Amber appeared at my elbow. How generous, Sylvia. Her voice was sugar over glass. Though we did discuss keeping gifts more practical this year, Lucas has so many toys he doesn't use. I'd discussed nothing with her. He specifically wanted this one. Did he? I don't remember him mentioning it. She took the box from Lucas's hands. We'll see if we can find room for it. I watched my grandson's face fall, and something hardened in my chest. I spent the next 20 minutes playing with Lucas and the other children, genuinely enjoying their energy and laughter. Derek never came over to talk to me. He avoided my eyes every time I looked his way. Then came the cake. Everyone gathered in the dining room singing while Lucas blew out 6 candles, his face glowing with pure childhood joy. I stood next to Rachel, trying to memorize this moment, knowing I'd probably be shut out of the next birthday too. After everyone had cake, Amber touched my elbow. Sylvia, can we talk in the hallway? My stomach dropped, but I followed. The moment we were alone away from the party noise, Amber's friendly mask evaporated. What I saw underneath was cold, calculated anger. We need to establish some boundaries, she said. Her voice was low, controlled. Real ones, because this situation has gone on long enough. What situation? I kept my voice steady. Your constant presence in our lives, your interference, your money solving every problem before we even ask. She crossed her arms. Derek and I are done with it. I'm sorry if helping my family offends you. Helping? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Is that what you call it? Because from where I stand, it looks like control. You use your money to maintain influence over every decision we make. I have never asked for control. You don't have to ask. It's implied. Every dollar you give comes with invisible strings. I paid for your wedding, so you owe me. I covered daycare, so I get unlimited access. I helped with bills so I can criticize how you live. I have never said any of that. You don't have to say it, Sylvia. It's in every disappointed look, every helpful suggestion, every time you just show up unannounced with your gifts and your cookies and your neediness. The word neediness hit like a slap. I'm trying to be part of my grandchildren's lives. By hovering over everything we do, by making us feel incompetent in our own home. Amber stepped closer. Well, I have good news. We don't need your help anymore. Derek got a big promotion. We're financially stable. So here's what's going to happen from now on. She counted on her fingers like she was explaining something to a child. 1, stop showing up uninvited. If you want to see Lucas and Sophie, you ask us first and wait for permission. 2, stop with the expensive gifts. You're not buying their affection. 3, stop offering to pay for everything. We're adults. We can handle our own finances. I opened my mouth to respond, but she wasn't finished. And one more thing. Her eyes went hard. Those trust funds you set up for Lucas and Sophie. We've decided we should have control of them. There it was, the real reason for this conversation. The trust funds are structured specifically to protect our children, Sylvia, not yours. We should be the ones making decisions about money that's meant for them. Derek's going to contact your lawyer next week to have the trustee changed from you to us. Every muscle in my body went rigid. Those accounts are designed to give Lucas and Sophie opportunities when they're adults. That's exactly why I'm the trustee. We don't care about your reasoning when you set them up. Those are our kids. That money belongs in our family, managed by their actual parents. You've done enough damage trying to control everything with your checkbook. She moved even closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. From now on, you see the kids when we allow it on our terms, following our rules. And if you don't like those conditions, then you don't have to see them at all. Trust me, we'll be perfectly fine without your interference. She turned and walked back to the party, her expression instantly brightening as she rejoined the guests. Like she'd just checked the weather, not delivered an ultimatum designed to cut me out of my grandchildren's lives. I stood alone in that hallway, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might be sick. Rachel found me 60 seconds later. One look at my face and she said, "We're leaving, right now." I managed to say goodbye to Lucas, who hugged me tight and asked why we were leaving early. "Grandma's not feeling well, sweetheart." I told him, which was absolutely true. In the car, I couldn't speak for the first 10 minutes. My hands shook on the steering wheel. Rachel sat beside me, radiating silent fury. Finally, I pulled into a shopping center parking lot, put the car in park, and pulled out my phone. Thomas Brennan answered on the 3rd ring. "Sylvia, everything all right? Thomas, I need you to freeze the trust funds, immediately. All 3 of them, Lucas, Sophie, and Owen." A pause. "All 3. Derek might try to use his relationship with Rachel to access Owen's fund. I'm not risking it." "Consider it done. I'll have the paperwork filed first thing Monday morning. Those accounts will be completely locked. No withdrawals, no transfers, no changes to trustee designation without your direct written approval and physical presence in my office." "Thank you." "Sylvia, what happened?" I told him briefly about Amber's demands. He let out a long breath. "You're doing the right thing. I'll make sure those trusts are protected." When I hung up, Rachel was staring at me with something like admiration. "You just declared war." "No," I said quietly. "I just protected my grandchildren from their own parents." But Rachel was right. I had started a war, and I had no idea how brutal it was about to get. That night I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Martin's side still empty after 4 years, and replayed every moment of the last 7 years. Every check I'd written, every boundary I'd let Amber cross, every time Derek had chosen her over me, and I'd told myself it was normal, that's what married men do. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely find my car keys. That's what kept running through my mind that moment in the hallway, when Amber had looked at me with such cold contempt, and I'd realized she didn't just dislike me. She hated me, resented every dollar I'd given, every moment I'd spent with my grandchildren. And the worst part, the absolute worst part, was the tiny voice in my head asking, is she right? Had I been controlling using money to maintain relevance in Derek's life because I was lonely? Because this big empty house felt like a tomb, and being needed made me feel alive. I got up at 3 in the morning and went to my office. Pulled out every bank statement, every receipt, every documented contribution I'd made to Derek and Amber's household over 7 years. The final number made my stomach turn $127,000. $127,000. Wedding, daycare, medical bills, car repairs, groceries, utilities when they came up short, family vacations, Christmas presents, school supplies, dance lessons for Sophie, soccer fees for Lucas. I'd kept records because my accountant insisted, but I'd never actually added it all up before. Never wanted to, because that would make it feel like a loan instead of love. But sitting there at 4 in the morning looking at 7 years of family assistance laid out in spreadsheet form, I had to ask myself, what was I buying? Their gratitude, their presence, the right to be called Grandma. My phone buzzed. A text from Rachel. "Can't sleep either. You did the right thing. Don't you dare doubt that." I wanted to believe her. Monday morning arrived cold and gray. I drove to Thomas Brennan's office downtown, my hand steady on the wheel now. I'd made my decision. Second guessing wouldn't change anything. Thomas had everything ready when I arrived. His office felt safe, all dark wood and leather chairs, and the kind of quiet competence that comes from 30 years of protecting people's money. Both trusts are now frozen solid, he said, sliding documents across his mahogany desk. I've notified the bank that holds the accounts. There will be no withdrawals, no modifications to beneficiaries, no changes to trustee status. Nothing moves without your signature in person in my presence. I signed where he indicated my signature firm and clear. I've also added an additional security measure, Thomas continued. If anyone attempts to access these accounts or legally challenge the trust structure, I'm to be notified immediately and will respond accordingly. This includes any claims of power of attorney or guardianship. You think they'll try that? Thomas leaned back in his chair, his expression sympathetic, but knowing. Sylvia, I've been doing this for 30 years. I've seen this exact scenario play out dozens of times. Adult children or their spouses start viewing trust funds as their money instead of protected assets for the actual beneficiaries. They convince themselves they have a right to it, that they know better, that the trustee is being unreasonable. He paused, choosing his words carefully. You were smart to make yourself trustee with full discretionary control. Those funds are meant to give Lucas and Sophie opportunities when they're 25, not to fund their parents' lifestyle upgrades now. Derek said they got a promotion, that they don't need my help anymore. Then they don't need the trust funds either. Thomas's voice was gentle but firm. Sylvia, can I ask you something? Do Derek and Amber know the accounts are frozen yet? Not unless they've already tried to access them. They will, probably this week. He smiled slightly. And when Derek calls me to demand the trustee be changed, the answer will be a very clear, very professional no. The trust documents are ironclad. They have absolutely no legal standing to demand changes. I should have felt relieved, protected. Instead, I just felt sad. Thomas, what if I'm wrong? What if they really do need the money for something legitimate? What if I'm being, I couldn't say the word, controlling? He said it for me. Sylvia, there's a difference between control and stewardship. Control would be using the money to force behavior. Do what I say or you get nothing. Stewardship is protecting assets for their intended purpose. You're not threatening to withhold the money unless they comply with your demands. You're simply maintaining the original purpose to be there when Lucas and Sophie are adults. Amber said I use money to manipulate them. Did you ask for anything in return for the $127,000 you gave them over 7 years? The number clearly surprised him. I'd mentioned it on the phone, but hearing it again made it real. No. Did you ever threaten to cut them off if they didn't do what you wanted? No. Did you keep a running tally to throw in their faces during arguments? Not until now. I gestured at the folder I'd brought. I only added it up this weekend because I needed to know, to understand what I'd actually given. Thomas reached across and squeezed my hand, a gesture that went beyond professional boundaries but felt necessary. Then you're not manipulating anyone. You're a grandmother who loved her family and helped when they needed it. The fact that they now resent that help says more about them than you. I waited for Derek to call. He didn't. Not Monday, not Tuesday, not Wednesday. By Thursday, I was the one who broke. I called him during my lunch hour, my heart pounding. He answered on the 5th ring. Mom, hi. His voice was strained, tired. Derek, honey, how are you? Busy, what's up? Like I was a telemarketer, like we hadn't had a relationship that spanned 42 years. I wanted to check in after the party. We left so abruptly and I didn't get to really talk to you. Yeah, Amber mentioned you seemed upset. No apology, no concern, just acknowledgement that I'd had emotions he found inconvenient. She said some things that were pretty hurtful, Derek. Silence on the line. Then, she said you two had a conversation about boundaries. Is that what she called it? Mom, I don't want to get in the middle of this. You're not in the middle. You're my son. You're her husband. You're exactly in the middle, Derek, whether you want to be or not. I need you two to work this out between yourselves. My chest tightened. Work what out? She told me I could only see my grandchildren on her terms, at her convenience, with her permission. What part of that should I work out? She's their mother. She has a right to set boundaries about who has access to our kids. I'm not who, Derek. I'm your mother. I'm their grandmother. I know that. He sounded exhausted. I know. But Amber feels like you've been overstepping, and I have to respect her feelings about our family. Our family. Not his family, including me. Their family. The one that didn't include his mother. Did you know she's planning to ask Thomas to transfer the trust funds to your control? The silence was answer enough. Derek, those trusts are set up specifically to protect Lucas and Sophie's futures. They're not supposed to be accessible until the kids are 25, I know, but we're their parents' mom. It makes sense that we should have some say in how money meant for our children is managed. You do have a say. You can make suggestions about investment strategy. You can discuss what kinds of things the money should eventually be used for. But you have final control. You're the only one who can make actual decisions. His voice rose slightly. Do you see how that's problematic? How that gives you power over our family? It gives me responsibility for my grandchildren's futures. That's different from power. Is it? The question hung in the air between us. Because from where I'm sitting, it feels like just another way you maintain control over our lives. I closed my eyes. This was Amber talking, not Derek. These were her words in his mouth. Derek, in the 7 years since you married Amber, I have given you over $127,000 in various forms of help. I never asked for repayment. I never demanded you do things my way. I never threatened to cut you off if you didn't comply with my wishes. So please explain to me how that's control. The number shocked him into silence. He struggled for words. That's not, you didn't have to give us that much. You're right. I didn't have to. I wanted to. Because I love you and I love my grandchildren. But apparently that makes me controlling and manipulative. My voice cracked. When did helping become a crime, Derek? It's not about the money, Mom. Then what is it about? More silence. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I have to go. I'll call you later. He hung up. I sat in my kitchen phone, still in my hand, and cried for the first time since Martin's funeral. Not pretty tears. Ugly, gasping sobs that came from somewhere deep and wounded. I'd lost my son. Not to death or distance, but to a woman who'd convinced him that his mother's love was actually a weapon. 2 days later, I received a text from an unknown number. We know you locked the accounts. That money belongs to our children. Unfreeze them immediately, or you will never see Lucas or Sophie again. This is your last warning. I stared at the message for a full minute, my coffee growing cold in my hand. The number wasn't saved in my contacts, but I knew who it was. Amber's tone was unmistakable, even in text form. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the message to Thomas and to my personal lawyer, Margaret Torres, who I'd worked with on estate planning. Margaret called me within an hour. Sylvia, this is a direct threat involving minor children. We need to document everything. I am. That's why I sent it to you. I mean everything. Every text, every email, every phone call. If this escalates to a custody dispute, you may need to file for grandparents' visitation rights. This text could be evidence of parental alienation. The phrase made my stomach turn. Parental alienation. Legal terms for what should have been simple family love. I don't want to take them to court, Margaret. I understand, but you need to be prepared for the possibility that they might take you to court, especially if they try to break the trust structure and you refuse. I blocked Amber's number. Whatever she needed to say to me, she could say through lawyers. Rachel called that evening. James contacted me. Derek's brother. I hadn't spoken to James in over a year, not since Amber had gradually frozen him out of family events. What did he say? He ran into Derek at the hardware store yesterday. They talked for a few minutes, first real conversation they've had in months. Rachel's voice was tight with anger. Mom, Derek, and Amber are trying to buy a house. My chest constricted. A house, not just any house. James said Derek mentioned something about finally upgrading to the neighborhood we deserve. He was excited talking about gated communities and top-rated schools. I thought about the property appraisal papers I'd glimpsed on their dining table months ago. How can they afford that on Derek's salary? They can't. That's the point. Rachel paused. James did some digging. He still has friends in real estate. There's a house in Meadowbrook Estates that matches Derek's description, listed at $1.2 million. 1.2. I couldn't even finish the sentence. The down payment on a mortgage that size would be at least 20%. That's $240,000, Mom. The number hit me like a physical blow. Exactly the amount in Lucas's trust fund. Not just Lucas's, Sophie's too. $480,000 would cover the down payment plus closing costs with money left over for furniture and renovations. Rachel's voice was shaking now. They were planning to drain both kids' futures to buy themselves a showcase house. I sat down heavily, my legs suddenly unable to hold me. They were going to take everything from both children. And they weren't going to ask your permission or even tell you. James said Derek mentioned finalizing some financial details this month. They were going to change the trustee, pull out the cash, and present it as a done deal after the fact. All the pieces clicked into place. The hostility, the demands for control, the threats to cut off my access to the grandchildren. It had never been about boundaries or my interference. It had been about money. $500,000 that stood between Amber and the lifestyle she wanted. That's why she confronted me at the party, I said quietly. They probably had an offer ready to submit. They needed access to the funds immediately. And when they realized you'd frozen everything, they panicked. Rachel's voice turned fierce. Mom, you saved those kids' futures. You know that, right? If you hadn't locked those accounts when you did, Lucas and Sophie would have nothing. No college fund, no down payment for their own homes someday, no safety net, nothing. My hands were shaking again. They would have sacrificed their children's entire futures for granite countertops and a 3-car garage. Welcome to Amber's true colors, Rachel said bitterly. Over the next week, I worked with Thomas and Margaret to document everything. Thomas provided a complete timeline of every attempt Derek and Amber had made to access the trust funds. It was worse than I thought. Derek had called Thomas's office 4 times in the 2 weeks before Lucas's birthday party. Each time he'd asked about updating the trustee designation and clarifying the terms of fund access. Thomas had been professionally vague, not wanting to alert me unless it became serious. I thought he was just asking theoretical questions, Thomas admitted. I didn't realize there was an immediate plan, but the most damning evidence came from the bank manager. Amber had shown up at the bank 3 days before the birthday party, claiming she had power of attorney for the trust funds. When the manager asked to see documentation, Amber had become hostile and argumentative. She insisted her husband was the beneficiary's father and therefore had rights to the account, the manager told Thomas in a documented phone call. When I explained that the trustee was Sylvia Morrison and only she could authorize transactions, Mrs. Amber became verbally aggressive. She said, and I quote, "That old woman has no right to control money that belongs to my children." The manager had asked Amber to leave and immediately called Thomas to report the incident. I flagged the account at that point, the manager said. Any future access attempts would require additional verification. So Amber had tried to commit fraud. She'd attempted to access accounts she had no legal right to using false claims of authority. And when that failed, she'd confronted me at a 6-year-old's birthday party and threatened to take away my grandchildren unless I gave her what she wanted. 3 weeks after I froze the accounts, Derek called and asked to come over. Both he and Amber wanted to talk. I almost said no. Almost told him that anything they needed to say could go through lawyers. But some part of me, the part that still remembered teaching Derek to ride a bike, helping him with calculus homework, dancing with him at his wedding, that part needed to try one more time. They arrived on a Tuesday evening. Amber wore a carefully neutral expression like she was attending a business meeting. Derek looked awful pale, exhausted with dark circles under his eyes that aged him a decade. We sat in my living room. The same room where Derek had played with Legos as a child, where Martin had taught him chess, where we'd celebrated Christmases and birthdays and ordinary Sundays. Now it felt like enemy territory. Amber spoke first, her voice controlled and reasonable. "Sylvia, we need to resolve this like adults. We all want what's best for Lucas and Sophie, right?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "We found a wonderful opportunity. A house in an excellent neighborhood with top-rated schools. Safe streets, good families, resources for the children." She leaned forward slightly. "It's an investment in their future. Better education, better opportunities, better outcomes." "How much is the house?" I asked. Derek shifted uncomfortably. $1.1 million, but it's worth every penny. The school district alone. And the down payment, silence. "How much is the down payment, Derek?" $250,000. His voice was barely audible. "Where were you planning to get $250,000? Amber's mask slipped slightly, irritation flickering across her face. "From the trust funds. Temporarily. We'd pay it back with interest when we sell the house eventually. It's essentially a loan against the kid's inheritance. Except the trust funds aren't an inheritance. They're protected assets for Lucas and Sophie's adult lives. Same difference, Amber said dismissively. It's not even remotely the same difference. I kept my voice steady. An inheritance implies you have a right to access it. These funds are specifically structured to be inaccessible until the beneficiaries are 25 years old. We're their parents, Derek said, finding his voice. We should have a say in financial decisions that affect our children. You do have a say about the money you earn, about how you budget and spend and save, but you don't have a say in money that's held in trust for your children's futures. Amber's careful composure was cracking. This is ridiculous. We're not asking to steal from our kids. We're asking to borrow money that's just sitting there doing nothing. It's not doing nothing, it's growing. It's being invested responsibly so that when Lucas turns 25 and Sophie turns 25, they'll have even more than the original amount. In 20 years, Amber's voice rose. You're talking about money they won't see for 20 years. What good does that do them now? It does them no good now. They're 6 and 3 years old. They don't need $250,000. But when they're 25 and need to pay for graduate school or start a business or make a down payment on their own first homes, they'll have it. That's the entire point. Derek stood up, clearly frustrated. Mom, you're not listening. This house isn't for us. It's for them. Better schools mean better education. Better education means better opportunities. Derek, I've heard this argument. It's very compelling. There's just one problem with it. I stood too, meeting his eyes. If this is really about the children's education and opportunities, then why not wait 5 years, save up your own down payment, and buy a house you can actually afford? Because this house won't be available in 5 years. There will be other houses. There are always other houses. I walked to my desk and pulled out the folder I'd prepared. But there won't be another chance for Lucas and Sophie to have protected funds for their futures if you drain those accounts now. I placed the folder on the coffee table between us. What's this? Amber asked warily. Documentation. Every attempt you've made to access the trust funds. Every phone call Derek made to Thomas. The incident at the bank where you claimed to have power of attorney. I looked directly at Amber. That's fraud, by the way. Falsely claiming legal authority to access accounts. Her face went white, then red. I was just asking questions. The bank manager documented everything, including your exact words about that old woman having no right to control money belonging to your children. Derek sank back onto the couch, his head in his hands. I continued, my voice steady despite my racing heart. This folder also includes records of every financial contribution I've made to your household over the past 7 years. $127,000 in wedding costs, childcare, medical bills, car repairs, groceries, utilities, and vacations. I let that number sit in the air for a moment. I'm not asking for repayment. That money was given freely with love. But I want you both to understand something. I have never not once used that generosity to control you. I never threatened to cut you off if you didn't do what I wanted. I never demanded gratitude or compliance in exchange for help. I looked at Derek. But you're asking me to give you access to nearly $500,000 meant for your children's futures so you can buy a house you can't afford. And when I say no, you threaten to take my grandchildren away from me. Mom, Derek started, but I held up my hand. I'm not finished. You say this is about the children. So let me ask you this: when Lucas is 25 and ready to start his adult life, what will he have? Will he have a $250,000 trust fund to help him launch? Or will he have memories of growing up in a nice house that his parents bought by taking his future? Silence. And when Sophie graduates college and wants to pursue her dreams, will she have the financial freedom to take risks and follow her passions? Or will she be starting from zero because her parents decided their comfort was more important than her opportunities? Amber shot to her feet, shaking with rage. You have no right to lecture us about parenting. You're not their mother. I am. And I know what's best for my children. Do you? I met her gaze without flinching. Because from where I stand, what's best for your children is having protected funds for their futures. What's best for you is having access to those funds now. Those aren't the same thing, Amber. This is unbelievable. She turned to Derek. Are you going to let her talk to me like this? Derek looked between us, his face anguished. For a moment, just a moment, I thought he might actually stand up to her, might actually see through the manipulation and choose his children over his wife's demands. But then he stood, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "We should go." "Derek!" I reached for him, but he stepped back. "I can't do this, Mom. I can't choose between you and my wife. I'm not asking you to choose between us. I'm asking you to choose your children's futures over a house you can't afford." But they were already heading for the door. I played my last card. "If you try to take my grandchildren away from me because I won't fund your lifestyle, I will file for grandparents' visitation rights. I have documentation of everything, the threats, the attempted fraud, the parental alienation. A judge will see exactly what's happening here." Amber spun around, her face twisted with fury. "You can't threaten us with court. You threatened to keep my grandchildren from me unless I gave you money. That's called parental alienation and financial coercion. I have your text message. I have the bank's incident report. I have witnesses to your demands." I kept my voice level. "Take me to court if you want. I promise you won't like how it ends." I turned to Derek one final time. "I love you, son. I always will. But I will not be manipulated or bullied into sacrificing your children's futures for your wife's dreams. When you're ready to rebuild our relationship without Amber's influence poisoning everything, I'll be here waiting." I paused at the door to the hallway. "But this conversation about money is permanently over. The trust funds will remain frozen and under my sole control until Lucas and Sophie are 25 years old. That's final." They left without another word. Amber slammed the door hard enough to rattle the windows. I stood in the sudden silence of my empty house and wondered if I'd just lost my son forever. The next 2 months were among the hardest of my life. Derek stopped calling entirely. Not even the obligatory weekly check-ins. I went from limited contact to complete silence. Amber posted vague messages on social media about toxic family members and protecting your children from negative influences. Her friends commented with supportive messages, none of them knowing the real story. I wanted to defend myself, to post my own version of events, but Margaret had advised against it. "Don't engage on social media. It never helps, and it could hurt you if this goes to court." So I stayed silent while Amber controlled the narrative. But something interesting started to happen. Derek's brother James called me. "Aunt Sylvia, I heard what happened. I just want you to know you did the right thing. Amber's been trying to isolate Derek for years. I'm glad someone finally stood up to her." Then my sister Betty called. Then several of Derek's old friends who'd been gradually cut off over the years. Then even some of Amber's relatives who'd noticed her behavior and felt uncomfortable with it. "She's always been obsessed with status." Amber's cousin told me over coffee. Growing up, she hated that we didn't have money. She was embarrassed by our neighborhood, our cars, everything. I'm not surprised she's fixated on a fancy house. I wasn't alone, and slowly I realized that other people had been seeing what I'd been seeing. They just hadn't known how to talk about it. Rachel was my rock. She called every day sometimes just to sit on the phone while I cried. She flew out twice just to spend weekends with me, making sure I ate and slept and didn't sink into despair. "Derek will come back," she kept saying. "It might take time, but he'll wake up eventually." I wanted to believe her. 6 weeks after the confrontation, James called with news. They lost the house. I'd been watering my garden, but I stopped the hose hanging loose in my hand. The house in Meadowbrook Estates. Someone else bought it. Derek and Amber couldn't secure the mortgage without the down payment. James paused. Apparently there was a huge fight. Amber was screaming at Derek about how he'd ruined their chance at happiness. Blamed him for not being man enough to stand up to his mother. My heart broke for my son. Even as he'd chosen Amber over me, over common sense, over his own children's futures, I didn't want him to suffer. "How do you know this?" "Derek's neighbor is a friend of mine. She heard the fight through the walls. Said it went on for hours." I sat down on my porch steps, suddenly exhausted. "James, is he okay?" "I don't know, Aunt Sylvia. I haven't talked to him directly. But according to the neighbor, he's been leaving for work earlier and coming home later. Avoiding being home." "He's avoiding her." "Seems like it." 2 weeks after that, on a random Tuesday evening, my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Rachel was in Boston. I'd stopped hoping Derek would visit. But when I opened the door, there he was. My son, looking worse than I'd ever seen him. Thinner, older, defeated. "Derek, can I come in?" His voice cracked. "Please." I stepped aside. He walked into the living room like a man heading to his own execution and collapsed onto the couch. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then Derek said in a voice so small I barely recognized it, "I'm sorry, Mom, for everything. You were right about all of it." My eyes filled with tears. "Derek, please let me finish." He looked up at me and I saw my son clearly for the first time in years. Not the exhausted shell Amber had created, but the man underneath. When we couldn't get the house, Amber, she blamed me for everything. Said I was weak for not controlling my mother. That I'd ruined our chance at happiness. That I was a failure as a husband and provider. He wiped his eyes roughly. And for the first time in years, I actually heard what she was saying. Really heard it. It wasn't about the kids. It wasn't about their education or opportunities. It was about her wanting a showcase house for her Instagram feed. It was about status and appearances and keeping up with people she barely knows. "Derek, I've been so desperate to keep her happy, Mom. So desperate to avoid conflict and make our marriage work that I couldn't see what she was doing to me. To us. To our whole family." His voice broke. "She isolated me from everyone who loved me before she came along. You, Rachel, James, my friends, everyone. And I let her do it, because I thought that's what being a good husband meant." I sat beside him, not touching yet, giving him space to continue. "I've been thinking about the trust funds, about what you said that we were choosing our comfort over our kids' futures, and you were right." He looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. "We were going to take everything you'd protected for Lucas and Sophie and spend it on ourselves. We told ourselves it was for them, but it wasn't. It was for us. For Amber's dream of living in Meadowbrook Estates. I know this is hard. I asked Amber to go to marriage counseling with me." His laugh was bitter. "She refused. Said there was nothing wrong with her, that I was the problem. That if I'd just been stronger, we'd have that house now. If I just stood up to you, we'd have the life she deserves." The way he said "she deserves" told me everything. "Derek, what do you want to do?" He was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "I want my life back. I want to be able to call my mother without having to hide it. I want to see my brother. I want Lucas and Sophie to know their family, their real family, not just the one Amber approves of." "That's good. That's a start." "I'm filing for separation." The words came out in a rush, like he had to say them quickly before he lost his nerve. "I've already talked to a lawyer. I'm going to fight for joint custody of the kids, and I'm going to try to rebuild my relationship with everyone Amber drove away." He finally looked at me. "Starting with you, if you'll let me." I reached over and took his hand. "Oh, Derek, I never stopped wanting you in my life. Never." He broke down, then really broke down, crying in a way I hadn't seen since he was a small boy. I held my son while he sobbed out years of manipulation and control and exhaustion. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry for everything. For choosing her over you. For letting her treat you that way. For trying to take the kids' money. Shh, you're here now. That's what matters." We sat like that for a long time until his tears subsided and exhaustion took over. "Can I ask you something?" he said eventually. "Anything." "The trust funds. Were you ever going to give in? If I'd kept pushing, kept demanding, would you have eventually unfrozen them?" I thought about it carefully before answering. "No, not for a house. Not for anything that benefited you and Amber instead of the kids. Those funds have one purpose: to give Lucas and Sophie freedom when they're adults. I would have gone to court. I would have fought you for years if necessary. Because protecting those kids' futures was more important than keeping the peace." He nodded slowly. "That's what I thought. And that's why I'm here. Because I finally realized you were the only one actually protecting my children, while their own parents were ready to sacrifice their futures for granite countertops. Amber's not a bad person, Derek. She's controlling and manipulative, and she's been emotionally abusing me for years." He said it flatly, like he'd been practicing. My therapist used those exact words: emotional abuse, isolation, gaslighting, all the things I didn't want to see. "You're in therapy. Started 2 weeks ago. After the fight about the house, I knew I needed help." He squeezed my hand. "The therapist asked me when I'd last made a decision Amber didn't approve of. I couldn't remember. Not one decision in 7 years that was really mine." My heart ached for him. "Honey, I'm so proud of you for recognizing this, for getting help, for choosing to change things. I just hope it's not too late. For us, for my relationship with Lucas and Sophie, for everything. It's never too late. I pulled him into a hug. You're here. You're aware. You're making different choices. That's all anyone can do. We talked until past midnight, about the divorce process, about custody arrangements, about how to protect Lucas and Sophie from the worst of it. And for the first time in 4 years, I went to bed feeling something like hope. The divorce was brutal. Amber fought everything. She demanded sole custody, claiming Derek was unstable and under his mother's manipulative influence. She asked for excessive spousal support, claiming she'd sacrificed her career to raise the children and deserved to maintain her lifestyle. She filed a motion to have me barred from seeing Lucas and Sophie, citing me as a toxic influence on the family. Margaret and Derek's divorce attorney worked together to counter every claim. They presented documentation of Amber's threatening texts, the bank's incident report about her attempting to fraudulently access the trust funds, testimony from James, Rachel, and several friends about Amber's pattern of isolation and control. They presented evidence of Amber's social media posts about the perfect life and amazing house she deserved, contrasted with the reality of their actual financial situation. Character witnesses lined up. Derek's employer testified about how his work performance had declined over the past few years, how he'd become withdrawn and anxious. A former friend of Amber's admitted she'd seen concerning behavior, how Amber would call Derek multiple times a day to check on him, how she'd gradually convinced him to stop seeing anyone she didn't approve of. I had to testify, had to sit in a courtroom and explain under oath why I'd frozen the trust funds, why I'd documented everything, why I'd threatened legal action. Amber's lawyer was aggressive. Ms. Morrison, you gave your son and his wife over $100,000 in 7 years, then cut them off the moment they didn't comply with your demands. Isn't that financial manipulation? I didn't cut them off for non-compliance. I stopped providing assistance when I discovered they were planning to misuse funds meant for my grandchildren. Misuse? They're the children's parents. Don't they have the right to make financial decisions for their family? They have the right to make decisions with their own money. The trust funds belong to Lucas and Sophie to be accessed when they're adults. But you control those funds. You have all the power. I have the responsibility to protect those funds for their intended purpose. That's not power. That's stewardship. The lawyer tried several times to paint me as controlling, vindictive, using money to punish Amber for not being the daughter-in-law I wanted. But Margaret was brilliant in redirect. She had me walk through every contribution I'd made, emphasizing that I'd never demanded anything in return, never withheld help to force compliance, never used money as a weapon until Amber literally tried to commit fraud to access accounts she had no right to. Ms. Morrison, when your daughter-in-law threatened to keep your grandchildren from you unless you gave her access to their trust funds, what did you feel? I thought carefully before answering. Heartbreak, because I realized she saw my grandchildren as leverage, as tools to get what she wanted, and I knew I had to protect them from that. No further questions. Derek testified about the manipulation, the isolation, the constant criticism when he tried to maintain relationships with his family, the way Amber had convinced him that everyone who loved him was actually toxic and controlling. She told me my mother was using money to manipulate us, Derek said from the stand, and I believed her. I believed her because I was exhausted and overwhelmed, and she was the only voice I heard anymore. She'd cut off everyone else. Amber's lawyer objected repeatedly, but the judge allowed most of Derek's testimony. The worst moment came when they brought in Lucas. Not to testify formally, he was only 6, but the judge wanted to speak with him privately about his relationship with his grandmother. When Lucas came out of the judge's chambers, he ran straight to me, wrapped his arms around my waist, and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "I missed you, Grandma. Mommy said you didn't want to see me anymore, but Daddy said that's not true." Amber's face went white. The judge made his ruling 2 weeks later. Joint custody. 50-50 split. Derek and Amber would co-parent with neither having majority control. Lucas and Sophie would spend equal time with both parents. Spousal support was granted, but minimal. The judge noted that Amber was perfectly capable of returning to work and that her lifestyle expectations were not Derek's responsibility to fund. And critically, the court finds no evidence that Sylvia Morrison poses any danger or negative influence to the minor children. The grandmother's relationship with Lucas and Sophie will not be restricted. Any attempt by either parent to interfere with that relationship will be viewed as parental alienation and may result in modified custody arrangements. Amber was also ordered to attend co-parenting classes. Margaret squeezed my shoulder as we left the courthouse. You won, but it didn't feel like winning. It felt like everyone had lost something. The custody arrangement started on a cold Monday in February, 8 months after that birthday party that changed everything. Derek had moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood. Nothing fancy, no gated community or prestigious address, just a clean, safe place where Lucas and Sophie could have their own room and feel at home. I helped him set it up. We spent a Saturday assembling furniture from IKEA, me holding pieces steady while Derek wielded the Allen wrench, just like when he was young and we'd build things together in the garage while Martin supervised. You sure about the bunk beds? I asked as we struggled with the instruction manual. Sophie might be too little. Lucas specifically asked for them. He wants Sophie on the bottom bunk so he can protect her from the top. Derek smiled a real smile, the first I'd seen in years. He's taking this hard. The divorce, going between houses. He's trying to be the man of the house when he's with me. My heart squeezed. He's 6 years old. I know. His therapist says it's normal. Kids sometimes try to take on adult responsibilities when their world feels unstable. Derek sat back on his heels, looking around the small bedroom. I want this place to feel safe for them. Not fancy. Just theirs. It will be, because you're here. That's what makes it home. The first time I saw Lucas and Sophie after the custody ruling, I cried. Derek had his first week with them and he'd invited me for dinner. Nothing elaborate, just spaghetti and garlic bread with ice cream for dessert. But when I knocked on that apartment door and Lucas yanked it open, screaming, "Grandma!" at the top of his lungs, I couldn't hold back tears. Sophie stood behind him, more hesitant. She was only 3.5 now, and months of limited contact had made me more stranger than grandmother. But when Lucas pulled me inside and Sophie saw me kneeling with open arms, she toddled over and let me hug her. She smelled like baby shampoo and grape juice. Her little hands patted my cheeks. Grandma cry. Happy tears, sweetheart. I'm just so happy to see you. We ate dinner at Derek's small kitchen table, Lucas chattering nonstop about his new school and his new bedroom and how he could see a playground from his window. Sophie mostly focused on her spaghetti, getting more sauce on her face than in her mouth. It was messy and chaotic and absolutely perfect. After dinner, Lucas showed me the robotics kit, the one I'd given him at that disastrous birthday party. Daddy helped me build the first robot. Want to see? We spent an hour on the living room floor building together. Derek did dishes and then joined us, and for a brief moment it felt like the family we should have been all along. When it was time for me to leave, Lucas hugged me tight. You'll come back, right? You're not going to disappear again. The question broke my heart. I will never disappear, Lucas. I promise. You can see me anytime you want when you're with Daddy. What about when we're with Mommy? I glanced at Derek, who looked pained. We'll work on that, buddy. But Grandma's always going to be in your life. Always. The transition wasn't easy for the kids. Derek called me one night, 3 weeks into the new arrangement, his voice strained. Sophie cried for an hour tonight. She kept asking for Mommy, said she wants to go home. Oh, honey, that's so hard. I know she needs to adjust. I know it takes time, but watching my 3-year-old sob for her mother... He choked up. I did this to them. I broke up their family. Derek, you didn't do this alone. And you're not breaking up their family. You're removing them from an unhealthy situation. There's a difference. Is there? Because right now it just feels like I'm the bad guy who made Mommy and Daddy stop living together. I chose my words carefully. What does Sophie's therapist say? Derek had insisted both kids see a child psychologist specializing in divorce. It was one of the smartest things he'd done. She says it's normal, that Sophie's too young to understand the complexity, so she just knows her routine changed, and she doesn't like it. She said to be patient, keep things consistent, and make sure Sophie knows both parents love her. Then that's what you do. You ride it out. You stay consistent. You show up every single day with love even when it's hard. I'm trying, Mom. God, I'm trying. Amber didn't go quietly. She continued to fight in small, petty ways that made co-parenting a nightmare. She'd return Lucas and Sophie in dirty clothes. She'd forget to pack their medications. She'd schedule activities during Derek's custody time and tell the kids they'd have to miss them if they stayed with Daddy. The co-parenting classes the judge ordered didn't seem to help. She sits there and nods and says all the right things, Derek told me after one particularly frustrating exchange. Then she goes right back to undermining everything. Last week she told Lucas that Daddy's apartment was temporary, and soon we'd all be living together again in a real house. She's still in denial. She's manipulating our 6-year-old with false hope. Derek's voice was tight with anger. Lucas asked me this morning if we were getting back together. When I said no, he cried, because Amber planted that expectation. Did you document it? I document everything now, every late pickup, every forgotten item, every inappropriate comment she makes to the kids. He sighed heavily. My lawyer says if it continues, we can file for modified custody, but I don't want to put the kids through more court proceedings unless absolutely necessary. I understood, but I also worried. Amber's social media presence intensified after the divorce was finalized. She posted constantly about surviving narcissistic abuse and protecting your children from toxic grandparents. She never named me directly, but the implications were clear. Her followers ate it up. Hundreds of comments supporting her, calling her brave, encouraging her to stay strong against family manipulation. Rachel was furious. She's building a public narrative where she's the victim. It's disgusting. Let her, I said. Anyone who actually knows the situation knows the truth. And the people who believe her version without question aren't people whose opinions matter to me. But it stung. Every post felt like a little stab, a reminder that Amber had spent years controlling the story, and she wasn't going to stop just because a judge had ruled against her. The real test came 3 months into the custody arrangement. Lucas had a school event, a grandparents' day, where kids could bring their grandparents to class for special activities. Lucas was so excited. He'd made me an invitation in art class covered in crayon drawings of flowers and hearts. Please come, Grandma, we get to show you our classroom and you can eat lunch with me and we're making crafts. I wouldn't miss it for the world. The event was on a Friday, Amber's custody day, but Derek had specifically negotiated in the custody agreement that either parent's family could attend school events regardless of whose custody time it fell on. I arrived at the school that Friday morning, my heart full of anticipation. The hallway was crowded with grandparents, all looking slightly out of place in the child-sized chairs, but glowing with pride. And then I saw her, Amber, standing outside Lucas's classroom with her mother, Lucas's other grandmother. She saw me at the exact same moment. Her expression went from neutral to hostile in a heartbeat. I walked over, keeping my voice pleasant and calm. Good morning, Amber. Sylvia, her tone was ice. I didn't realize you'd be here. Lucas invited me. He made me a special card. He made one for his real grandmother, too. She gestured to her mother, who looked uncomfortable with the whole situation. I refused to take the bait. That's wonderful. Lucas is lucky to have so many people who love him. Amber stepped closer, lowering her voice so other parents couldn't hear. You need to leave. This is my custody time and I don't want you here. The custody agreement specifically allows for family members to attend school events. I don't care what some piece of paper says. You've done enough damage to this family. Lucas doesn't need you here confusing him. My hands clenched, but I kept my voice steady. I'm not leaving. I promised Lucas I'd be here, and I'm keeping that promise. If you don't leave right now, I'm calling the school principal and having you removed for harassment. Before I could respond, a small voice cut through the tension. Grandma Sylvia, you came. Lucas had spotted me. He pushed past his mother and wrapped his arms around my waist, his face glowing with joy. Of course I came, sweetheart. You invited me, remember? Come see my desk. I want to show you the project I made. He grabbed my hand, pulling me toward the classroom door. Amber's face was red with fury. But what could she do? Lucas had just publicly claimed me as his grandmother in front of dozens of witnesses. If she made a scene now, she'd look like the bad guy. I let Lucas pull me into the classroom and spent the next 2 hours doing exactly what I'd promised, celebrating my grandson making crafts, eating terrible cafeteria pizza, and pretending my heart wasn't racing from the confrontation. Amber glared at me from across the room the entire time. Her mother tried to engage with Lucas, but he kept gravitating back to me, showing me his artwork, introducing me to his friends, holding my hand during story time. When the event ended and I was leaving, the teacher stopped me. Mrs. Morrison, can I speak with you for a moment? My stomach dropped. Had Amber complained, but the teacher was smiling. I just wanted to say Lucas talks about you all the time. He was so excited you were coming today. It's clear how much he loves you." Relief flooded through me. "He's a special boy." "He is, and he's lucky to have you." She paused. "I know family situations can be complicated, but from what I've observed, you're a positive presence in his life. I hope you know that." I drove home with tears streaming down my face. Happy tears this time. As the months passed, a new normal emerged. Derek and I fell into a rhythm. I'd come to his apartment once a week for dinner with the kids. On weekends, he had custody. We'd do activities together, parks, museums, the zoo. Lucas and Sophie started to relax around me again, started to trust that I wasn't going to disappear. Sophie especially blossomed. She'd been so little when Amber started limiting my access that she barely remembered our close relationship. But slowly she warmed up, started calling me Grandma instead of Sylvia, started running to me when I arrived instead of hanging back shyly. One Saturday she fell and scraped her knee at the playground. Derek was with Lucas on the swings, and Sophie ran crying, not to her father but to me. "Grandma, it hurts." I cleaned the scrape with wipes from my purse, applied a bandage covered in cartoon princesses, and kissed her knee. "All better," she sniffled, then nodded. Then she climbed into my lap and stayed there for the next 20 minutes, her thumb in her mouth, just wanting comfort. Derek caught my eye from across the playground. He was smiling, but his eyes were shiny. Later, after the kids were in bed, he said thank you. For what? For not giving up. For fighting for them even when I was too blind to see what was happening. For being exactly the grandmother they needed. He poured us both tea, a ritual we'd started these quiet talks after the kids' bedtime. I keep thinking about what would have happened if you hadn't frozen those trust funds, if you'd just given in to keep the peace. You'd have a bigger house. We'd have a temporary house that we'd lose in the divorce, and my kids would have nothing for their futures. Nothing, because Amber and I would have spent it all. He stared into his tea. "You know what the hardest part is? Realizing how close I came to completely failing my children. If you hadn't stood firm, hadn't been willing to be the bad guy, I would have let Amber drain their entire futures for a house we couldn't afford. You weren't failing them, Derek. You were being manipulated. I was being weak." He met my eyes. "I can admit that now. I was so desperate to avoid conflict, so desperate to keep Amber happy that I stopped being a father. I stopped protecting my own kids. But you're protecting them now. That's what matters. Only because you showed me how. You stood up to both of us, to me and Amber, knowing it might cost you everything. Knowing I might choose her over you." His voice cracked. "And I did choose her. For years I chose her. And you still fought for my kids." I reached across and squeezed his hand. "They're my grandchildren. There was never a choice." Rachel visited for Thanksgiving, bringing Owen. It was the first holiday with our family together in over a year. We ate at Derek's apartment, cramped but cozy, with Lucas and Owen sitting at the kids' table, a folding table Derek had borrowed, and Sophie in a booster seat at the adult table so she could feel big. The turkey was slightly dry. The mashed potatoes were lumpy. The green bean casserole came from a can. It was perfect. After dinner, while Derek did dishes and Rachel supervised the kids' sugar intake, Owen pulled me aside. "Aunt Sylvia, can I ask you something?" "Of course, honey." "My mom told me you protected my trust fund too, even though Uncle Derek wasn't trying to take mine." "Smart kid." "That's right." "Why?" I thought about how to explain it to an 11-year-old. "Because protecting one without the others would have caused problems, and because I wanted to make sure all three of you had the same opportunities when you grow up." Owen was quiet for a moment. Then, "My mom says you're the bravest person she knows. She says you did something really hard because it was right, even though it hurt." My eyes stung. "Your mom gives me too much credit." "I don't think so." He looked at me with those serious dark eyes. "I think you're really brave, and I'm glad you protected our money. My friend Ethan's parents spent his college fund on a boat, and now he can't go to the school he wants. That's not fair." "No, it's not fair. So thank you for making sure that doesn't happen to us." I hugged him, this almost teenager who understood more than I'd given him credit for. "You're welcome, Owen." A year after the divorce was finalized, something shifted. Derek called me on a Tuesday evening, his voice strange. Not upset exactly, but uncertain. "Mom, Amber wants to talk to you." My hand tightened on the phone. "About what?" She didn't say. Just asked if I'd arrange a meeting. Just the two of you. Every instinct screamed trap. Derek, I know, I don't love the idea either. But she was different when she asked. Quieter, less hostile. He paused. Her therapist recommended it. Individual therapy, not the co-parenting classes. Apparently she's been going for a few months now. She's in therapy. Seems like it. And Mom, she's been better with the kids lately. More consistent, less manipulative. He sounded almost hopeful. I don't know if it'll last, but something's changed. I thought about it for a long moment. If I meet with her, it's in a public place, with you nearby, and I'm recording the conversation. Fair enough. We met at a coffee shop halfway between our homes. Derek sat at a table across the room, close enough to intervene if needed, far enough to give us privacy. Amber looked different, thinner, older. The polished Instagram-perfect appearance had been replaced with something more real. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. Minimal makeup. She looked for the first time since I'd known her like a real person instead of a carefully curated image. We sat down. I ordered coffee. We sat in awkward silence for almost a full minute. Finally, Amber spoke. Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would. Derek said you wanted to talk. I did. I do. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup like she needed the warmth. I've been in therapy for 6 months now. Real therapy, not the court-ordered co-parenting bullshit. Working through some things. I waited. My therapist asked me to write down every person I've pushed away or hurt in the past 10 years. Every relationship I've damaged. Her laugh was bitter. It's a long list. You're on it. Obviously. Amber, please let me finish. I need to say this. She took a shaky breath. I've spent the last year blaming you for everything. The divorce, losing the house, Derek leaving all of it. You were the villain in my story. The controlling mother-in-law who manipulated my husband and stole my chance at happiness. She looked up, meeting my eyes for the first time. But that wasn't true. None of it was true. You didn't manipulate Derek. I did. You didn't steal anything. I tried to steal from my own children. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. I grew up poor, Sylvia. Like really poor. Welfare, food stamps, hand-me-down clothes, the whole thing. And I hated it. I hated being the kid who couldn't afford school trips or nice shoes or anything that made me feel normal. Her voice was thick with emotion. I swore when I grew up I'd never be poor again. I'd have the house and the car and the perfect life, and everyone would know I'd made it. That's understandable. It's understandable, but it's not an excuse. She wiped her eyes. When Derek and I got married and you were so generous, I saw it as, I don't know, proof that I'd married into the right family. Access to money and opportunities. And when you kept helping us, I started to feel entitled to it. Like you owed us that help. She took a sip of coffee with shaking hands. And then when you set up those trust funds and wouldn't let us control them, I felt rejected. Like you didn't trust us. Didn't trust me. And instead of examining why that might be, I decided you were the problem. The trust funds were never about trust. I know that now. They were about protecting Lucas and Sophie's futures. But at the time, all I could see was $500,000 that could give me the life I wanted. The house, the neighborhood, the status. And I convinced myself it was for the kids, that better schools and a nicer area would benefit them. But that was a lie. She met my eyes again. It was never for them. It was for me. For the girl who grew up poor and desperate to prove she wasn't that anymore. And I was willing to sacrifice my own children's futures to feed my ego. The honesty was staggering. Uncomfortable, real. When you froze the accounts and we lost the house, I blamed you. I hated you. I did everything I could to punish you, threatened to take the kids away, posted on social media, tried to paint you as the villain. She laughed bitterly. But you know what happened? I lost anyway. Lost my marriage. Lost custody control. Lost my reputation with people who actually knew the truth. Lost my kids' respect as they got older and started asking questions I couldn't answer. Amber, why are you telling me this? Because I owe you an apology. A real one. She straightened her shoulders. I'm sorry, Sylvia. I'm sorry for how I treated you. I'm sorry for trying to isolate Derek from his family. I'm sorry for threatening to keep your grandchildren from you. I'm sorry for trying to steal money meant for Lucas and Sophie. And I'm sorry for spending years making you the villain when you were just trying to protect kids from their own parents' worst impulses. I sat very still trying to process this. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking to be friends. I'm just trying to take responsibility for my actions. My therapist says that's part of healing, acknowledging the harm you've caused instead of justifying it. We sat in silence for a moment. How are you doing? I finally asked. Really doing. She shrugged. Some days better than others. I got a job marketing position at a local firm. It's not glamorous, but it's income. I'm renting a small house in a decent neighborhood. The kids are adjusting. She paused. And I'm trying to be a better mother. Actually present instead of worried about appearances. Actually focused on what they need instead of what I want. That's good. That's really good. I'm not doing it for you or for Derek. I'm doing it because when Sophie looked at me last month and said, "Mommy, why are you always mad?" I realized what I was doing to them. Realized they were going to grow up with the same damage I have if I didn't change. She finished her coffee. Anyway, that's what I wanted to say. You don't owe me anything. You don't have to accept my apology or change how you feel about me. I just needed you to know that I understand now. What you did, why you did it. You were right. About all of it. She stood to leave. Amber, wait. She turned back, looking exhausted and wary. I appreciate you saying all of this. It couldn't have been easy. I chose my words carefully. I don't forget the pain you caused, but I respect the work you're doing to change. That takes courage. Not courage, just desperation. She smiled sadly. But I'll take it. She left, and I sat there for another 20 minutes trying to sort through the complicated tangle of emotions. Derek came over and sat down. Well, she apologized. Really apologized. Took responsibility for everything. I know. She's been different lately. More human. He shook his head. I don't know if it'll last, but it's something. It is something. We sat together, my son and I, in this new reality where maybe, just maybe, healing was possible for everyone. 2 years after that birthday party, I sat in Thomas Brennan's office for our annual review of the trust funds. The accounts had grown significantly. Lucas's fund now held $312,000. Sophie's had $308,000. Owen's, which had been protected but not targeted, held $325,000. They're performing well, Thomas said. Conservative growth, diversified investments. By the time these kids turn 25, they're looking at $400,000 each, possibly more depending on market conditions. I looked at the numbers and thought about what they represented. Not just money, but freedom. Options. The ability to take risks, follow dreams, start over if needed. Lucas will be 25 in 19 years, I said. Sophie in 22, Owen in 14. Long time from now, Thomas agreed. You did good, Sylvia. Held the line when it was hard. Protected these kids even when it cost you. It almost cost me my son. Almost, but it didn't. Because sometimes standing firm is the only way to make people wake up. He leaned back in his chair. How is Derek doing? Better. Really better. He's dating someone new, a teacher very sweet, very grounded. The kids like her. He's in therapy working through everything. Rebuilding his life. And Amber? Making progress. She's consistent with custody now, actually co-parenting instead of fighting. The kids are doing well. I paused. I don't know if she and I will ever be close. Too much history. But we're civil. We can be in the same room for the kids' sake. That's enough. Thomas smiled. That's more than enough. That's growth. Last month, Lucas turned 8. Derek threw a party at his apartment. Nothing fancy, just pizza and cake and a dozen kids running around screaming. I was there, of course, and so was Amber. We didn't interact much. A polite greeting, a brief conversation about Lucas's progress in school. Then we stayed on opposite sides of the room, both of us focused on making sure Lucas had a good day. Rachel had flown in with Owen. James was there with his family. Even my sister Betty came. Derek's family together again. Not perfect. Still healing. But together. At one point, Lucas pulled me aside. Grandma, can I tell you a secret? Always. He lowered his voice conspiratorially. Daddy said you have special money saved for me and Sophie, for when we're grown-ups. My heart skipped. He told you that? Yeah. He said you protected it for us even when people wanted to use it for other stuff. He said that's because you love us. That's right, sweetheart. I do love you. So much. Will it be enough to buy a house like Daddy's house? Probably more than enough. You could buy a house or go to college or start a business or travel the world, whatever you want to do with your life. His eyes went wide. Wow, that's a lot of choices. That's the point. When you're 25, you'll have freedom to choose. That's the best gift I could give you. He hugged me tight. Thank you, Grandma. You're welcome, baby. Sophie ran over, then chocolate cake smeared on her face, demanding I come see her drawing. I let her pull me away, let myself get absorbed in the chaos and joy of a child's birthday party. And I thought about Martin, about his words in that hospice room. Money should build futures, not buy compliance. I'd spent years figuring out what he meant. Years making hard choices, standing firm, being willing to be the villain if it meant protecting what mattered. And finally I understood. Love isn't always soft. Sometimes it's standing firm when everyone wants you to bend. Sometimes it's saying no when yes would be easier. Sometimes it's being willing to lose everything to protect what truly matters. The trust funds would stay frozen until Lucas turned 25. Sophie turned 25, and Owen turned 25. No exceptions. No early withdrawals for houses or cars or anything else. Because I'd learned the hard way, the best way to love someone is to protect their future, even from themselves. That night, after everyone had gone home and my house was quiet again, I sat at my desk and pulled out 3 sealed envelopes. I'd written them a year ago, letters to each grandchild to be opened when they received their trust funds. I opened Lucas's reading what I'd written to my future 25-year-old grandson. Dear Lucas, if you're reading this, you're 25 years old. I don't know if I'm still alive to see this day, but I hope I am. I hope I get to see what kind of man you've become. By now you know the story of this money. You probably know it caused conflict in your family. You might have complicated feelings about it, and that's okay. I want you to understand why I protected it the way I did. When you were 6 years old, your parents wanted to use this money to buy a house. They convinced themselves it was for you and Sophie better schools, better neighborhood. But it wasn't not really. It was about status and appearances and trying to fill a hole that money can't actually fill. If I'd let them take it, you'd have grown up in a nicer house. But when you turned 18 and wanted to go to college, there'd be nothing. When you turned 23 and wanted to start a business, there'd be nothing. When you turned 25 and wanted to buy your own house, there'd be nothing. Because money spent on comfort today is gone tomorrow. But money protected for the future gives you choices. This $400,000 or however much it's grown to isn't meant to define you. It's meant to free you. Free you to take risks, to follow dreams, to recover from failures. Free you to be generous with others because you have security yourself. Use it wisely. Use it to build the life you want, not the life others expect. And if you someday have children of your own, I hope you'll consider doing the same, protecting their futures, even when it's hard, even when they don't understand, even when it costs you. That's what love looks like sometimes. Not soft or easy, but strong and protective. I love you, Lucas. I always have. I always will. Grandma Sylvia, I sealed the letter again and put it back in the safe where it would wait for 19 more years. Then I went to bed in my big quiet house and slept better than I had in years. 6 months later, on a random Thursday afternoon, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Derek standing there with Lucas and Sophie. Not his custody day, just there. Mom, the kids wanted to surprise you. We made cookies. Lucas held up a container of what looked like chocolate chip cookies, though they were slightly burnt around the edges. We helped, Sophie announced proudly. Well, come in. This is the best surprise. They tumbled into my kitchen, Lucas already talking a mile a minute about school and soccer and his newest Lego creation. Sophie climbed onto a chair and started telling me about her preschool field trip to the pumpkin patch. Derek put on coffee while I got out milk for the kids. We sat around my kitchen table, the same table where I'd sat alone so many nights during the worst of the conflict, and ate burnt cookies and laughed at Sophie's increasingly elaborate pumpkin story. There was a pig, Grandma, and he was this big. She spread her arms wide. And he sneezed on my friend Emma, and she screamed. That does sound scary, I said seriously. I wasn't scared. I petted him. Lucas rolled his eyes. The pig wasn't that big, Sophie. You're exaggerating. Am not. Are too. Derek and I exchanged glances over their arguing, both of us smiling. Normal family chaos. The kind I'd missed desperately. After the kids ran off to play in the backyard, the same backyard where Derek had played as a child, Derek and I sat at the table with our coffee. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what? For not giving up on me. On us. On this." He gestured around the kitchen. "There were so many times you could have walked away, could have decided I wasn't worth the fight. But you didn't. Derek, you're my son. You were always worth the fight. I know that now. But I didn't then." He stared into his coffee. "I think about the alternate timeline sometimes. The one where you gave in, unfroze the accounts, let us take the money. We'd have bought that house. The marriage still would have fallen apart eventually, I see that now. And in the divorce, we'd have had to sell the house, split the proceeds. Lucas and Sophie would have ended up with nothing. But that's not what happened. Because of you. Because you were willing to be the bad guy. Willing to have me hate you temporarily to protect my kids permanently." He reached across and took my hand. "You're the strongest person I know, Mom, and I'm sorry it took me so long to see it." Through the window, I could see Lucas pushing Sophie on the tire swing, both of them laughing. "They're going to be okay," I said. "Both of them. They have a father who learned hard lessons and came out stronger. They have a mother who's working to be better. They have a family who loves them. And they have futures that are protected and waiting. Thanks to you. Thanks to all of us. We all played our parts." We sat in comfortable silence watching the grandchildren play, and I thought about how far we'd all come. How much had been broken and was slowly being repaired. It wasn't perfect. Amber and I would never be close. The scars from those years of conflict would always be there. But we were healing, growing, moving forward. And 19 years from now, Lucas would turn 25 and receive a trust fund that could change his life. 22 years from now, Sophie would receive hers. Not because I was controlling or manipulative, but because I loved them enough to protect their futures even when it was hard. Even when it cost me everything. Even when no one understood. That's what grandmothers do. We protect. We endure. We stand firm. And we love with a fierceness that doesn't quit even when it would be easier to walk away. The trust funds would stay frozen until my grandchildren were adults. And I'd do it all again in a heartbeat. Because some battles are worth fighting. Some lines are worth holding. And some futures are worth protecting no matter the cost.